Welcome to the show, Ambassador Sikri. Thanks for sparing out your valuable time for the show.
A pleasure to be here.
I was luckily be able to be a part of your book launch when our Foreign Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, revealed the book. So, sir, the book is very interesting for personally me because it has answered a lot of questions that I've always searched for, especially about India's neighborhood policy, especially about India's neighborhood conundrums. You have targeted the very fundamentals of it.
Yeah.
So that is the most interesting part that I've found. So what would you like to say when you started off with, especially off with the South Asian countries, you have targeted the very roots of it. Coming to the part that they were all rooted in India.
Yeah.
So it was a very centric part of it, which was later divided into certain parts post-British era.
Yeah.
So what would you comment on this part?
Well, the questions which are in your mind were also in my mind. That how is it that India has such poor relations with its neighbors? And my analysis led me to the conclusion which I've outlined in my book, that our neighbors are actually artificial entities which came into being only after 1947. India was divided. But Pakistan is an artificial entity, we know that. It's a very unnatural division which has taken place. And the other neighbors also, they were always connected with the larger, well, we call it Akhand Bharat in a cultural civilizational sense. And their history and culture and people-to-people contacts have always been with India. So when they became independent nations, the first thing they had to do was to establish a new identity as a modern nation state. Right? Now, how do they define themselves as a modern nation state? Because of their close links with India, Indian subcontinent, Indian culture, they had to show that they were not Indian.
Right.
That's the first point. So then the next step becomes that you start distancing yourself from India. So distance yourself a little bit. Otherwise, you'll get too merged with that. That's the next step. The third step is then you become anti-Indian. And the final step is that anything which goes wrong is India's fault.
Right.
So, yet you will find that the neighbors want India to be involved in their affairs. You see how, so many of the political parties in our neighboring countries, they want India's involvement. And yet, they say, oh, but you are interfering in our internal affairs. So it becomes a little bit of a problem for them. The other thing is that because they are artificial, many of them are not self-sufficient in any way and have to depend on contacts and assistance from outside. Now, the most logical thing is for them to be more closely involved with India, to take advantage of the large market, the other infrastructure, resources, etc. But then it becomes problematic for them. Oh, but we are getting too close to India.
Is it somewhat related to the big brother syndrome?
Well, we are a big brother. There's no question about it. I mean, all our countries, neighboring countries, are in, tens of millions only. We are 1.5 billion. So the size, resources, power differential is too much.
Correct.
And this creates a problem for them. Only Pakistan thought that it could be the equal of India. But even now they don't have even that pretense because we have outstripped their growth and potential.
But sir, even if the divide is understood to be artificial, if you look at the average Pakistani citizen for that matter, apart from their, esteemed intellectual capacity of their supposed institutions that actually study their history, the average Pakistani is often taught a more revised edition of events. So even if the divide is artificial as we understand it, do you really think this could be solved purely through diplomacy instead of...
No, of course not. It cannot be. This is ingrained in the people themselves. Diplomacy is only one element of interstate relations. So, no, it cannot be solved only by diplomacy. The countries, our neighboring countries, have to feel a little more self-confident. They have to understand that their progress, development could be facilitated, accelerated by closer contacts with India without their losing their identity. I think only one of our neighbors has succeeded in that, and that is Nepal, Bhutan, which, we respect its sovereignty, identity, everything. But they have leveraged their proximity to India and have gained a lot. So their GDP is much, much better, and their per capita income is much better than that of other countries, because they've seen that how to benefit from India. Now, the latest thing which the King of Bhutan is projecting is this mindfulness city in the Tarai, in the foothills of Bhutan, which I think they hope to leverage as a kind of a new Singapore or Hong Kong. But the target is the Indian market, Indian investment. So if they do that, then they can benefit. Many of our neighbors have, whenever they've been in difficulty, they have turned to India, whether it is during COVID, whether it is to bail them out of an economic crisis, whether it was natural disasters like the tsunami, or even essential commodities and goods. Maldives depends hugely on India, whether it is on service industry. So, they understand, I think, that they can't do without India, but they don't like it. And therefore, they try and countervail India's overwhelming influence by seeking to involve outside powers. Whether it is the United States or China or other countries, who are only too happy to get involved because it gives them leverage against India. That anything which keeps India a little down, a little weakened, a little more absorbed in regional affairs means it cannot play that greater role in world affairs that we seek to.
So coming to this point specifically, when you mentioned of aid, so sir, do we ever desire to get over with the aid diplomacy that we are doing right now? Because whenever there is a tumultuous situation or whenever there are troubles in the troubles in the neighborhood, we are the first one to respond. Not even in the neighborhoods,
Yeah.
in subcontinental affairs, we are the first one to respond.
Yeah.
So, do you think being just a good neighbor is doing any profit to India right now, or do we have to change our mindset?
Of course, it is doing profit to India. We can't, geography is immutable. You cannot change geography.
Right.
So we have to live with our neighbors. And my perspective is that let us treat them in an economic sense, not political. Political, as I said, we have to respect their sovereignty, independence. But in an economic sense, treat them like small Indian states.
Right.
You give so much money to the Indian states, a lot of it is wasted.
Right.
So if you give something to Bhutan or Nepal or Sri Lanka, it doesn't really matter in a larger perspective. Look at the benefit that we get if we have a friendly relationship with, say, Nepal. We save so much money on maintaining our armed forces. Otherwise, if it was a closed, hostile border, then you'd have to have the armed forces there. What is the cost of 800 keeping an army on 800 kilometers of the India-Nepal border? It's huge.
Right.
So, and then we need, if we do not help them to develop, then what is happening actually already. You will have a stream of migrants, legal, illegal, across these very poorly policed borders, who spread out all over India. I mean, with Nepal and Bhutan, we have open borders. And you know that there are maybe about 10, 15 million Nepalis living, working in India.
It's a very porous border and it's open like this.
So,
work.
okay, with Bangladesh, you don't have an open border, but in practice, a lot of Bangladeshis come in.
Right, sir.
So what do? You can't really close the borders firmly. you've tried it with Bangladesh. It doesn't work because the terrain is such. There are forests. There is rivers. There is, I mean, even the United States cannot police the border, which is a riverine border in a desert area with Texas and Mexico. How are we going to do it? Yeah, you can talk about it. Yes, we will police the border. We will have it. But I think other than with Pakistan, we haven't really succeeded in having a firm, closed border. And this is not just a problem which afflicts India. Look around the world. Which country has been able to avoid some porousness in its border? The United States has a problem. Europe has a problem. So, there's a natural flow of people. And when your neighboring country is not as well off, then they will seek to come to India for better opportunities, which is normal. And I think in India also, if you get cheaper labor, your industry and others say, okay, we will take the cheaper.
We are going to Canada, USA.
Yeah, so
Mexico's border.
the same thing.
Right.
You have the donkey route, all kinds of things. So you think that the neighboring countries don't have similar systems? They do.
So it's basically the psychology of
So
people.
what I'm trying to suggest is that, well, of course, India is developing, and I'm sure that it will continue to develop. But we cannot develop as well as we might otherwise unless we take our neighboring countries along with us. Because, it's like the level of water. If you're at this level and this is this level, it has to match somewhere. So if there is development in our neighboring countries, if they are stable, then people will not come across because they'll say, well, we are happy here, we've got opportunity. So what I'm trying to suggest is that it is in India's interest to help these countries develop.
Right. So, sir, coming to the chapter where you have mentioned about Bangladesh, there is a very important line that I found about Bangladesh's identity. From Pakistan to Indian, then again to Bangladeshi. What do you have to comment on it? Like, just explain it to the viewers. What was your psychology while writing this line?
No. Look, before 1947, everyone was Indian.
Right.
Then in 47, those people who are now in Bangladesh became Pakistanis. For 24 years, they remained Pakistanis. Then they became Bangladeshis. Now, that is one element. The second thing is that they have a Bengali identity and an Islamic identity.
Right.
So when they broke away in 1971 from Pakistan, they were asserting their Bengali identity. The pride in being
Their
a Bengali.
culture, their
Culture, language, everything was there. In 1947, it was the Islamic identity. Because don't forget that the creation of the Muslim League was in what is now Bangladesh.
Right.
This Direct Action Day in Calcutta, which was a very important trigger for partition and the riots, happened there.
It was heavily focused on that part.
That part, And what has happened now, 3 months ago, is the revival of the Islamic identity, because the Islamic elements are much stronger. So they oscillate between these identities. The Bangladeshi identity, the Pakistani identity, the Bengali identity, the Islamic identity. And it becomes very problematic for us.
Right.
And additionally, the saddest irony in that in the time of the British Empire, 1905, the Bengalis fought staunchly to prevent partition.
Exactly.
And now they've transformed into eventually, they're ripping apart the republic themselves. We've all seen the videos, tearing down the statues of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman.
Right.
The irony is that he was a right. Aussie, it's so extreme and so violent. It's often like rewriting the history of their own country.
Yeah. It's like, somebody in India for disowning the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi. I don't think anyone in India would do that. But that is what they have done now in Bangladesh. But I think one has to remember that when the liberation war in 71 took place, there were a lot of people in Bangladesh who did not want independence. It was infiltrated. There was a lot of Pakistani thinking there. Because don't forget that the Bangladesh army, police, security forces were basically Pakistani. Their orientation, etc., was Pakistani. And the other problem with the armed forces of Bangladesh is that, okay, what are they defending against? What are they preparing to defend against? India? Because India is the only country which surrounds them other than a small border with Myanmar. And now once I was telling a Bangladeshi editor, I said, why are you afraid of India? Don't you remember, don't forget that 71, we actually came into your country,
Right.
but then we left the country with the territorial integrity scrupulously intact.
Exactly.
All these problems of the enclaves and so forth have just been sorted out a few years ago. So I said, so that's not the thing. We're not looking at invading your territory. But it is the psychological, the mindset which is a problem.
So very interestingly, during your book launch, I read this paragraph in the first instance that you were able to mention that there is an interest of the white man, and it has been mentioned in your book already. And I presume that this chapter was already written before the.
Yeah, this was finished in June.
Okay, so I presume that the Bangladesh, whatever happened in Bangladesh and the regime change, your book was already written at that.
Yes, my book was written. But there's some hints of that here.
Right. So, sir, how were you able to so surely mention that there are interests of United States in this region? And moreover, when the Mizoram CM has now, he went to the USA last month in September, but the video is trending right now that he is in the interest of forming a cookie state.
Well, मेरे बाल सफेद हैं, आपके काले हैं.
Right. So, sir, what do you want? Like, is there actually an interest in this region of United States, and why there exists a interest in this region?
Of the United
States.
Well, the United States has an interest in all parts of the world. They are the only great power, really, because, whether it's in terms of economy, technology, control of international institutions, finance, currency, everything. They are on top. In absolute terms, they may be a little less powerful than they were, a couple of decades ago, but they are the only great power, and they have the capability and the will to
Engage in.
to have their will around the world. It's not just India or South Asia. You see how they treat the Europeans.
Correct.
They treat them like nothing. You had the situation where a couple of years ago, President Biden was saying we're going to blow up this pipeline, and Scholz was standing there. Okay, can you imagine that? See, there were troops in Europe, in Japan, in Korea. There were, I don't know how many bases, tens of bases around the world. Hundreds of thousands of their troops are around the world. They've got fantastic espionage and intelligence activities. So, the way I see it, the United States is number one and wants to remain number one. So, how do they ensure that? They ensure that by, apart from the Dadagiri, they want to ensure that no regional power feels comfortable in its region. So you take Europe. They have constricted Europe by having the EU and so forth. They play off now the new Central and East European countries against the traditional powers like France and Germany. In East Asia, China is constrained by Japan, Korea, Philippines, Thailand. They're allies. There's the AUKUS, which is coming up, there. And in South Asia, they have constrained India by using Pakistan, as we know, for decades.
Exactly.
It has been a constant policy of them. So anything which makes us a little uncomfortable, which compels us to focus more on our neighborhood, like Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or Maldives or Pakistan or Nepal, it means that we can devote less attention and fewer resources to engaging with the rest of the world. And I think they understand. In the last 25 years, they've begun to take India more seriously ever since we became a nuclear power after 1998. So they have learned the lessons from China, the rise of China, which, as you know, they facilitated.
Right. In Richard Nixon's visit.
Yeah, Nixon's visit. And otherwise, they helped China come on because they wanted China to balance the Soviet Union and then Russia. But then China has turned out to be a Frankenstein monster which has grown.
It's now overpowering the enemy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, they see India, in my view, as a potential great power because we have the size, the resources, the will, everything we have, all the preconditions to be a great power. And we have now, in Prime Minister Modi, a leader who thinks strategically, who thinks ahead, who talks of a vision of Viksit Bharat in 2047, who's trying to urge the country to modernize and, be a little more focused. And they don't want India to become another China.
Exactly.
Because, we are today the 5th largest economy in the world. In a few years, hopefully become the 3rd largest. Maybe still small. But, in 20 years, you could be pretty big. And then that poses a problem.
They're looking for a long-term plan.
Yeah, you're looking for a long-term plan. So while they need India for various reasons, whether it is to counter China, whether it is to take advantage of our undoubted human resources, skills, so many Indians are very talented. They're heading major corporations. Our people are very bright. So they want to use these resources. But they don't want India to feel too confident that, it will become a threat. So you will get these things like Pannu and Nijjar and, democracy nahi hai, all that kind of nonsense goes on. It's just to keep India down.
So, sir, in your book, you essentially mentioned spheres. Now that you've also talked about the fact that you've said, the white man's involvement and stuff like that. And one of the spheres you have named is the prosperity sphere.
Yeah.
Which now, I as a student of history realize that it's essentially the same name Japan once gave to Asia when it was waging a war against the Swedes. So I have to ask, what do you think? The way Japan once waged war against, Western powers, and is the same thing that Hideki, the Prime Minister, said at his trial at, Tokyo, where he said that it was the inability of the Western powers to look upon Asians as an equal. So given the fact that, as I would personally believe that the events now with the conflicts that are occurring often mimic and mirror those that occurred in the 1930s. We have the Sino-Japanese War and now we have Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Russia. Things are essentially boiling up. So do you believe there is a possibility for something similar to occur perhaps in the coming decades?
Similar where?
Essentially, in Asia, the China-Taiwan incident that might be occurring, or we have expansionism in Russia, Ukraine escalations, even Iran or Israel going at it directly instead of waging proxy wars.
No, the world is in a great turmoil right now. There is no order, and I don't foresee any order emerging. Why I talked about this arc of prosperity is because when you take Asia, east of India and east of India, you have 3 billion people between India and China, and you add another billion, half a billion in ASEAN, and then a couple of 100 million more, Japan, Korea, and so forth. That's a lot of people. That's half the population of the world in a relatively small area. And all the countries are doing quite well. Yeah. They're well endowed with resources, their populations are good, it's fairly large and sustainable. So that is where, the growth will take place. It doesn't mean that the other areas aren't important. They are. I mean, West Asia is very important from a strategic point of view, but that is what I call the arc of instability. There's so much uncertainty there. There is in Southeast Asia and East Asia also, but there are many more frameworks like the East Asia Summit, like ASEAN, and even the Chinese have some kind of a cooperative arrangement with Japan and Korea and ASEAN and so forth.
So, sir, we are having this podcast on a very strategic day when we are having the United States poll right now. So, sir, there are three problems that Indian think tanks and Indian policymakers are predicting right now. The first one is that when India is getting more involved towards the BRICS and we are getting towards a more nationalistic approach when it comes to trading and using the current, moving towards de-dollarization basically, as Indian rupee trade is also going up, and as there is a slogan of Trump, make America great again. So, sir, how do you think this thing will affect India? Okay, we are moving towards a more de-dollarized approach. Will there be a stick again from America's side? Second one is, as India is having its own identity in the region and becoming a superpower, and you said that it doesn't want India to become another China right now. How would be Trump's dealing with India? And like, of course, when there is a regime change, if by chance. And sir, like first these two you can answer, and then I'll move towards the third question.
Well, what happens in America really doesn't depend on India. It is, however, possible that the Indian American community may play a role in some of these swing states. But I don't think that India figures in the politics of the United States. So we'll have to deal with whoever comes to power.
Right.
The basics are unlikely to change. I think that Trump, being a businessman, it'd probably be easier to cut some deals with him. With Harris, I foresee kind of a continuation of the Biden policies. But then Trump is a little volatile, unpredictable.
In Trump's case, sir, there's a lot of talks going about the tariffs.
Yeah, I think he will be tough on trade. He'll be tough on immigration. But I think from his remarks, he seems to have a good relationship with Prime Minister Modi. He's talked about him a couple of times. There was a Modi event in Houston, I think.
Houston posters.
And then you came to Ahmedabad. He likes shows,
Right.
And I think Mr. Modi is very good at putting up these shows. So, there's a possibility of cutting deals with Trump. I don't think that he would compromise on any basic U.S. interests. He's likely to be very tough on China, which to the extent it keeps China a bit down, helps us. So that is there. Now, on BRICS and de-dollarization, I don't think that we are going into de-dollarization in any hurry. The US dollar is still dominant in the world. And I think, as Dr. Jayashankar explained, that we're not consciously seeking to move away from the dollar. But if there are problems that are being created by the policies and sanctions of the United States, then we have to look at alternatives. Whether it is rupee trade or a basket of currencies. Now, China and Russia seem to be very keen on some kind of a BRICS currency. We are not very enthusiastic about that. I think our long-term economic interests lie more with the United States and the West, and I don't think we're going to jeopardize those. Our trade and investments are more with these countries. So I don't think we will actively work for de-dollarization. What is likely to happen in the long term is that we are likely to look at find, and a lot will depend on the state of the U.S. economy, the confidence in the US dollar. In recent months, you have seen a trend towards gold. You know, a lot of countries
Suddenly,
are buying, the price of gold is going up. We ourselves, now I don't know whether this is linked to what has happened in the global scene in the last couple of years, but we have transferred a few hundred tons of gold from England to India.
I was recently reading a study, sir, in which it was said that the Bretton Woods agreement that happened, which linked the world economy with the dollar, now it's moving towards gold again. Because the countries want to have a safe future in this tumultuous times. They are thinking that there might be chances that in some manner or the other, the dollar would exploit them maybe.
Well, you know, one of the things which is keeping the dollar as a global currency is that there are no other alternatives.
Right.
I mean, the euro hasn't really taken off the way it is. There to a limited extent. There's the pound sterling, there's the Japanese yen, Swiss franc, but you know, nothing compared to the scale of the dollar. Because if you look at the capital markets, US is the biggest. And there is a certain faith in the US dollar. So I don't think that the dollar is going to go
In the
away.
future, it's not going anywhere.
No, I don't see it going away. But there will always be a search for alternatives to the. One of the important factors that determines the role of the US dollar as a global currency is the pricing of oil in US dollars. And that is a deal which the Americans made with Saudi Arabia 50 years ago.
Right.
I read some reports, these are unconfirmed, I haven't been able to get any confirmation, that Saudi Arabia is now saying that, okay, this is no longer valid. And I think the Chinese and Saudi Arabia are saying we will conduct trade in yuan. There are many other countries which want to do that. The United States will make every effort to ensure that this does not happen. Because when oil is priced in US dollars, everyone would want dollars. So if you do not price it in dollars, then it becomes problematic. The second thing is that a lot of the US growth is dependent on US debt. US owes about $30 trillion or something, $35 trillion in debt, which means that it's financing its growth by giving IOUs to other countries.
Financing. Right.
Okay, you know, we owe you $1 trillion, $2 trillion.
Is it somewhat related to the same concept of debt trap diplomacy?
No. It's just that, you know, even China, okay, so if you've got surplus foreign exchange, we have about 700 billion now, where will you keep it? Are you going to keep it in China? No. In India, your currency is not convertible. So you have to have some medium,
Circulation.
which is freely tradable. And because the US does not have capital controls, you can freely transfer money in and out. So there's a certain confidence.
Right.
And because it is an open system, so there's an independent judiciary, so there is confidence that, you know, okay, we'll get some justice there. Nobody is going to trick us. Now, these perceptions are changing somewhat because the Americans have just taken $300 billion of Russia's money. And I think this is a little alarming and probably short-sighted on the part of the United States. So let's see what happens. But I don't see the dollar going away in a hurry. Yes, there will be attempts to reduce the dependence on the dollar, but short of some calamity, I don't see that happening in the short term.
So my third question was, I didn't want to come directly to the continent again, but there have been predictions that if by chance Trump comes, then he'll be able to solve the problem in Bangladesh because Mohammad Yunus is very anti of Trump. So do you think if by chance Trump comes into power, he'll be able to solve this Bangladesh-India conundrum?
Look, we have to have our own policy on Bangladesh. It is possible that, Trump and Yunus don't get along because it is well known that Yunus has been very close to the Clintons, who have been instrumental in his getting the Nobel Peace Prize and all that. In any case, from whatever information I have, Muhammad Yunus is not really calling the shots. He's there as the figurehead, makes a nice thing, but I don't think he's in control of the situation.
Right.
And he doesn't have the administrative or political experience to run the country. Changed their policy on Bangladesh. And I'm not sure why they started this and why they think that the fundamental Islamic forces in power in Bangladesh is helpful to the United States. My own understanding is that even the United States is a little worried because while they may have, or certain elements there may have engineered this change or facilitated it, things haven't gone quite the way
They desired.
they desired it to be.
Right.
So this is still early days. You see the problems are piling up in Bangladesh. Now, Adani has said he's going to stop power in a couple of days unless they start paying the money which is owed to them. Their ready-made garments industry is in doldrums because they need power and, the confidence is not there. So I think Bangladesh will also have to rethink its relationship with India. And it's a very complex situation. I'm sure our government is thinking of alternatives, but what is required is some strategic patience.
Right.
So before you continue, I'd like to go back to the dollar and oil for a moment. So you called the Middle East the arc of instability. And that is understandable given the circumstances in the
Not the Middle East as such, but this whole region, from Myanmar to Palestine. It includes, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, Lebanon. The Gulf is a little separate. That is what I call the R for energy.
So essentially, we've all heard the fact that when the Iraq invasion happened, it was essentially because the Saddam Hussein's regime and the Al-Baath party, they wanted to break the petrodollar system. Wherein, they wanted to take oil for gold. So we've all heard the allegations, and it's a joke that people, the first operation that the American army was called Operation Iraqi Liberation. The issues were oil. It's a very common joke that people make. So how complicit do you think the US government actually is in creating instability? Because in the 60s, the CIA actively didn't allow it over. But do you think to this day they are complicit in inciting chaos, instability, just across the world?
Well, I don't have any independent information to confirm that, but there's a lot of talk along the lines that you have mentioned, even by American sources. I mean, I just finished reading a fascinating book called The Untold History of the United States, which lists all the dirty jobs that the United States over the decades has done around the world. So, what they have been doing in Latin America is well known. You've seen what happened in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, and Iraq, where they said there were weapons of
Mass destruction.
There was nothing of the kind. You see the bombing of Libya. You see Syria. Now you see Ukraine. Again, Ukraine is an attempt to ensure that Russia remains bogged down.
Exactly.
I mean, Ukraine-Russia is becoming like an India-Pakistan situation.
Right. Sir, there is a very interesting thing that you have mentioned about China, and I want to relate this thing as the very recent disengagement agreement that have happened on the sidelines of BRICS 2024. And this question has been asked by 2 or 3 of my teammates as well. Just in the same manner, China lulled India into complacency with its mendacious bhai bhai and punch-shield rhetoric. Does the LAC disengagement which happened recently sound the same to you?
No, because I think that the trust has gone out of India-China relations. in the 50s, when we had the Panchsheel Agreement, Mr. Nehru trusted the Chinese. He believed that the Chinese and Indian people and civilizations could and should work together. I think he misjudged the Chinese, unlike Sardar.
We know Sardar Patel's remarks on it.
But this time, this is a limited agreement, and both, as far as I know, within the government and in the wider public, there is no trust of China, because the Chinese had written agreements with India which they have violated. So there is no reason to believe that if you sign another agreement with them, they will violate it again.
And keeping this aside, this is a very short agreement and related to a very short thing of disengagement with relations to the petroling at a very specific location.
Yeah.
They have not talked about Arunachal here. They have not talked about Aksai
Sorry,
Chitra.
the Depsang and them choke. Huh?
Right. It's not a thing to get happy.
No.
Yeah.
It breaks a logjam. Right. It clears the way for engagement at political levels, between the NSAs, the foreign ministers, regular talks and so forth. So it sort of removes the logjam in relations, but it's a long way ahead.
So, sir, me and Kumamjeet were also discussing this during our last podcast with Lieutenant Colonel J. Sodhi, that is China somewhere or the other trying to focus more on the Taiwan issue, destabilizing or like not focusing upon its borders with India and focusing more upon the Taiwan's border. It should be very short and it should be, it should be very decisive. They have seen these examples in the Israel, Gaza, now Russia, Ukraine, that they have
obviously Taiwan is the number one priority for China.
Right.
But they have to be a bit careful there, because the involvement of the United States, their direct involvement is possible, and it could lead to a much bigger clash. That doesn't mean that relations with India are not important for them. I think, as I've mentioned in my book, the Chinese would want to keep India down and keep India under pressure. I don't think they're interested in settling the border in any hurry. In fact, I don't see any clean resolution of the border issue, because, the public positions of the two sides are so far apart that it's going to be difficult for either side to sell any agreement to the public. So, in the foreseeable future, what we can best hope for is that the border remains quiet and we carry on. And, let's see, there will be a new element which in a post-Dalai Lama scenario will be a different thing. They could get more complicated. We have to prepare for that.
So, while concluding your book launch as well, when your speech was ending, you also said that there might be a different phase when Dalai Lama passes away. So, what's the meaning of it? I was not able to understand why Dalai Lama's death is related.
Well, there's a question of a reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. Now, the Chinese have said that they will decide who's the reincarnated Dalai Lama. Now, it's a very odd situation where an atheist state claims to decide who is going to be the reincarnation. So, Dalai, it's also not clear whether, Dalai Lama will in his lifetime say that, oh, this is an emanation, that so-and-so will be the Dalai Lama. He could say that somebody will be born maybe in India, maybe in USA, maybe in Dharamsala, maybe in Taiwan. I don't know. It could happen. The Chinese will produce their own Dalai Lama. Then, so it will get very complicated, because the Dalai Lama carries a lot of influence. There may not be a Dalai Lama. And the present Dalai Lama has already given a lot of his political powers to the Sikyong, the central Tibetan government in exile.
The question of the Panchsheel Lama,
Yeah.
who was kidnapped.
Yeah, the Panchsheel Lama was kidnapped and they put in a fake another Lama. Pata nahi kahan chala gaya. So all these could create problems. And I think in one way or another, India will get involved.
We'll have to get involved. It's very strategically very important location.
So it's just so much uncertainty So, and that's what I meant.
So on a personal level, I have to ask. So everyone unanimously agrees that the United States is the military top dog on this planet.
Yeah.
But the issue that I've often realized in studying, history is that if we look at Vietnam, the US on a technical military level was winning the war on ground, but it lost when the regimes that favored war were voted out of power. So if we look at the China and Taiwan conflict, couldn't the argument be made as such that, China is not really fighting the US military, it's fighting the US voter? Because, Taiwan is that one issue that if China manages to clear, the US is no longer the supreme power in the world. Because if it faces a setback as violent as Taiwan, and if it is unable, if the population itself does not allow America to write in a military measure, perhaps, suppose, any government that favors war is voted out, their lobbying fails essentially, and US does not take military action. So isn't it decisive that the Chinese are essentially fighting the US voters? If the main, the main conflict is in the US election itself. They have to wait out the storm.
No, I don't think the US voters, I think there is a general consensus in America about Taiwan. But there's one other element about Taiwan that we should bear in mind, and that is that Taiwan controls the semiconductor production in the world. And if that were to be disrupted, it would affect every country. The second is that, any Chinese takeover of Taiwan is not going to be easy. Because over the last 70 odd years, the separate Taiwanese identity has developed. And as the Americans have realized, you can bomb a country, you can do whatever, but in order to rule a country, you must have some kind of a
Population engagement.
population,
Right.
And they went out of Vietnam, they went out of Uganda, because ultimately it's boots on the ground that matter.
Right.
So unless the Chinese have the willing support of the population of Taiwan, it would not work. And China could get involved in something which could trigger unpleasant domestic consequences for China itself. Because any failure in Taiwan will reverberate politically in China itself. So I think that China will have to think very carefully about what it does, because anything which goes wrong will trigger
A lot of political, economic consequences will be there.
The fact is, China as a government is not one that would shy away from human rights violations. So, say if I had Hong Kong, what is the guarantee that they will do?
It's not a question of human rights violations. It is a question of perception, because then you're seen as being weak. And there is already, as we know, considerable discontent within China. So that could, exacerbate. That could be
About their cases.
Yeah.
So when we are talking about this issue of building up consensus within the population, just yesterday only there were videos circulating of what we call as the Azad Kashmir. There were then there are posters in the villages that either get us a separate country or merge us with India, and is the last thing that you would do is stay in Pakistan. So there is a building consensus that is going on in the Pakistani occupied Kashmir, and there are statements from the defense minister and home minister that there would be no need to actually get the boots on the ground to occupy the POK. The population and like seeing the development in Kashmir right now, they're having this syndrome, okay, why we are not able to develop this much? If they are across the border, there is a lot of development that is going on. So there are successful elections here. So why do you think that like on some grounds POK is moving towards a more its ability to join India again, or is there any intelligence side that Indian government is doing right now in POK?
Look, I don't have enough information about what is happening in POK. This is odd news that you also see. But certainly there is discontent in POK about the way they have been treated by Pakistan, as there is in other parts of Punjab, Baluchistan and Sindh and Afghanistan, we know that. So they're also seeing what has happened in India, how India is progressing. I think they look at Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, and I think what has happened in the last few years, this revocation of Article 370, now the elections, all this has an impact on people because they say, what are our lives compared to the lives there? If there is tourism booming there, if people are making money and there is some political expression, then it's okay. But ultimately, this is never going to be an easy thing to integrate POK with India because you have the Chinese presence there. They will not want to give it up easily.
So, sir, for a moment, I have to ask. So, why do you think India never managed to capitalize upon its goodwill in Central Asia? Was that something you mentioned in your book as well?
Because we have no connectivity with Central Asia, and we were never able to be relevant to their immediate priorities. You could not. What were their priorities? First was how to stay in power, how to be stable, how to be prosperous. Now, if you have no trade, if you have no connectivity, then it's very difficult to build up relations with the country. We tried. Pakistan doesn't let you access. There was the Taliban in Afghanistan for a while, and so there's no. So we tried indirect connectivity via Iran, but that's very complicated, multimodal, and so forth. And then our people just not interested enough because this coincided with our opening up to the world, and everyone was looking west for technology, for investments, for trade. And this is far too difficult. Say, chodo, there's no need.
So, recently, when the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict occurred, it did actually reach out to the Indian government as well.
Who reached out?
The Armenians.
No, I think we are having some defense cooperation with them. No, we are having some cooperation. I'm not saying that we aren't. But there is nothing compared to, say, what the Chinese are doing, what Russia is. We are overshadowed in that, obviously. Because they are immediate neighbors. And they have many more levers and advantages that we don't have. So what we are trying to do now is, technical cooperation, students, a lot of tourists are going there now, which is good. There's IT sector, education, all that is there. But hardcore trade is not there. No?
So considering time constraints, we have to come to the conclusion of this podcast. What are your reviews for the discussion that we have had, sir, and any recommendations that you have for us?
No, I think we've had an interesting chat, and I hope your audience finds it useful.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you for these.
One thing I'd like to say.
Right.
I'm particularly happy that it's young people like you who are interested in this because my book is primarily targeted at younger people, your generation. Because I think it's important that young people in India should have a better understanding of foreign affairs because it affects our lives much, much more than it did when I was your age. And we must understand what is at stake and what we can do, what we must do. So my book is an attempt to share my experience with the younger generation who can have dreams of a Viksit Bharat, but then you have to work for it.
Right.
You have to understand what are the constraints, where are the opportunities, and above all, you must have a self-belief and a faith that you can do it. If you think that I'm not going to be able to do it, of course you won't do it. No, so this is a very important thing. And I feel one of the things which we should be aware of is that there are too many people in India who are constantly running down our country. They go abroad, they talk there, they write articles, they've got political figures who go and appeal to foreign countries to interfere. This is really shameful. We must have pride in ourselves, Yeah, we have our weaknesses, but you don't go around saying, I'm bad. Come on, you don't do that. You invite somebody to your home, you don't say, oh, my house is so dirty.
Right.
So I really hope that young people will find my thoughts of some interest.
Thank you so much for your wisdom and blessings, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.